If ever there was proof needed that no one can predict what will be a hit in Toyland, then this game of 54 wooden blocks is it. Each block on its own holds no allure, but stack 3 of them in a row, 18 rows high, and well, magic happens. Hold your breath and steady your hands, because this is Jenga. Since its breakout year in 1986, Jenga has become one of the most popular games in the world. Its maker, Hasbro, reports that it is sold in, get this, 117 countries. Jenga was invented by a woman named Leslie Scott. She was born in Tanganyika, now Tanzania, Africa, and raised in Kenya, East Africa, before moving with her family to Ghana in 1972. Let's go back to this time and place with the woman that started it all. Leslie Scott, how are you?
I'm very well. It's got cold outside and I've just cranked up the heating in here. I might be moving to Florida soon.
Well, it's so exciting to talk to you. We've known each other for a long time. I'm sure we'll get into that.
Yeah.
But let's start at the beginning. So you told me that I believe you were a senior in high school when the wooden block set came as a gift to your little brother. Tell me about that.
It was Ghana, where it's a place where wood is it's one of their major exports, is timber. These were I believe these were sort of offcuts from a timber mill, and they were just sort of blocks that he played around with.
The blocks were called Ta-Ka-Radi blocks.
Ta-Ka-Radi was the main port in Ghana. Having had this set for him, we then actually had a few sets made deliberately to play as this game that we called Takoradi Bricks.
In the mid-1970s, Leslie and her family began playing a game called Takoradi Bricks, like this. They were stacked in this manner, and the object of the game was to remove one of the blocks and keep it. And everyone took turns doing that until the tower toppled. Leslie's family had multiple sets of Takoradi blocks or Takoradi bricks made for friends at this time.
I mean, our family just played games. We made games out of everything. So it's kind of no particular surprise that he's playing with his blocks, and we sort of push him out of the way and start playing with his blocks, kind of thing. I mean, that was the basis of the game, the game that then I turned into Jenga. But we're talking about that as sort of, another maybe 4 or 5 years later. This sort of penny dropped that this wasn't a game that existed. I often hear people saying it's an African game. Well, it wasn't. I mean, there's no evidence of anybody playing a game with little wooden blocks like that in any sort of culture. And as I said, it sort of took a little while for me to, I didn't go from that point of just playing it in Ghana to thinking, here's a game, I must go out and turn it into a game.
Instead, Leslie moved to England and took her box of bricks with her. She turned her sights toward getting an education, first at Oxford by studying teaching, then by working for a fledgling microprocessor company you may have heard of called Intel.
It wasn't their first European office, but it was one of their first big offices in Europe, was in Oxford. And that comprised 5 people. I mean, that was Intel then. And I worked for them for quite a while and actually I had the most fantastic job with them in as much as it was it was very, very early days for them, and therefore incredibly exciting. It was incredibly early days for the microprocessor. People didn't know what it was. So I sort of landed myself in a position where I was working for this amazing company. And it kind of spoilt me for working for anybody else. It's probably totally the wrong way around. I just decided I wanted to start a company. And then I thought, well, what am I going to do? What are we going to do in this company? I mean, it's sort of and by that stage, I had I had my box of bricks that I'd been living in Oxford and had lots of friends in Oxford. And so it was at that point I sort of worked with it.
She was now a game maker, and she improved the play of her game by adding a rule that said when you remove a block from the tower, you have to place it on top. This meant that as you played, the tower grew higher and higher and more unstable, adding tremendous suspense to the game. And this necessitated another change.
You wanted a more stable tower to start with, so I started with the process, sort of thinking that you just stack them flat. But if you were going to do that, then they needed to be a little bit shorter, so you could end up with a sort of quite a solid tower to start with, not something that was sitting on its sides with lots of gaps in it already. And that was fine, so I sort of figured that out, and then realised, of course, that what was key to the game was the fact that these were handmade. And that meant that they were all slightly different. That was possibly the most difficult thing in the designing of this game. Figure out how to mass produce the blocks and keep that randomness in it.
In 1982, after encouragement from friends who loved her game, Leslie talked to a colleague who was a carpenter, and he helped her figure out a way to make a template that attached to a sander. That helped her make her game blocks much more efficiently. Then she found a company called Camp Hill Products, a sheltered workplace, that helped her make the first 500 copies of her game. Now all she needed was a good name.
Going back to saying that I grew up in East Africa. I grew up in East Africa speaking Swahili, and my family all spoke Swahili. So we used to name, our dogs and everything got a Swahili name. And Jenga, it means build. It's the imperative. It actually means, get on and build. If it hadn't been Jenga, it might have been Cheza, because Cheza means to play. But the reason it wasn't Cheza, which I still think is quite a good name, is that my mother's dog was called Cheza, so we couldn't. It would have been really weird to have to name a game after my mother's dog, but
it was almost Cheza.
It was almost Cheza. It would have been a good name, I think.
With the 500 games that Camp Hill Products made for her, Leslie took a stand at the 1983 British Toy and Hobby Fair. There, Jenga, the Perpetual Challenge, debuted.
I spent an absolute fortune on the stand. I wanted it to be. I was not going to go down in a little side booth or anything. I wanted, this game was going to take the place by storm. So we had this beautiful exhibition stand, and people would go by and they would come in and they would play, because when it fell over, it made this almighty noise, and everybody would come in, and I thought this this is fantastic. We didn't take one order, not one. We had names to follow up on, but we didn't. I didn't know whether that was normal or not. I've never done, I never tried to sell a product before. And I thought, well, when I could hear other people going, in booths down the lane, like, what's his name, have taken 1,000 or whatever they've got. Oh,
so were you totally dejected after that show?
It was a very, very steep learning curve. I just thought the game would sell itself, and that was not what was going to happen. Harrods took it, and in the lead up to Christmas, and I spent days in Harrods. Occasionally you rope somebody in who would agree to play, and then as the game started playing, then people would gather, like a mass of people sort of watching this game, and they would stop, and you could see them sort of wanting to go on to do their shopping, but being so intrigued by this and sort of standing and watching. And then it would get to the point where it all fell over into the crowd, onto the floor, in amongst all these people, and they'd all go, ah, and all walk off. and so I was on my hands and knees, crawling around, picking up blocks.
I found an ad, and the company name was Leslie, Scott and Associates.
Oh, okay. Well, that's actually quite funny. That my brother is an American. He was at the university in Kentucky. It ran in the Smithsonian, and I think it ran in the New Yorker. I think we probably got about 2 sales from both. I think after the show in that summer, so it must have been summer of '83, I went over to America. I mean, I can remember arriving. I first went to New York with my boxes of bricks, and I got off the plane, and I asked somebody to give me a hand to lift this thing off the luggage belt, and he sort of lifts this up, and I said, "God, what do you got in here, lady? Bricks?" And I said, "That's exactly what I've got in there." It's like he thought we just sort of parted company. And I went around the States with my slightly decreasing box of bricks.
Was there a moment when you said, "This is going to work"?
This sounds so weird to put it this way. I never thought it wasn't going to work. I know that sounds. It's so. When I think back at that person I was then, it completely astonishes me that I started designing other games, so we had more product, and it was a fun thing to do in itself. But all of this was somehow or another thinking about how to get Jenga better known.
Leslie sold her house to keep Jenga going. She created a mail order catalog and eventually a line of games. And despite some success, she thought Jenga was destined to be a small-time venture. Still, there were moments that offered hope. She organized a Jenga tournament that went really well, and word of the game started to spread.
I went to this store one day with my sister, actually, to look for presents, and they had Jenga there. This woman came up and was looking at it. She was sort of looking at it, and then she was sort of putting it back, and then she was looking at it, sort of obviously trying to figure out whether or not it was something that would appeal. And my sister sort of went up to her and said, "Oh, I have to tell you, that's my sister's game." And this woman said, "No, it's not. It's mine. I got here first," and walked off with it. And I thought, and there was sort of moments like that where you thought, "Oh, this game's going to work." I don't know. It was. I don't know why I didn't want to give up, but I didn't want to give up.
Leslie had been selling the game for 3 years, and wherever she went, she ended up planting the seeds of the game. When she visited a friend in LA, she left a game behind. That friend's brother, Robert Grebler, was visiting LA when he saw the game. He owned a fledgling health food company in Canada. When he saw this wooden game, he thought it might be a fit for his health food accounts. He contacted Leslie and struck a deal. His company, Pokonobe Associates, became the exclusive distributor for Jenga in North America. A toy company veteran named Hal Ross, a salesman at Irwin Toys, Canada's oldest toy company, saw Grebler demoing the game and loved it. Ross championed for the game to be added to Irwin's toy line. There was only one problem. I interviewed Hal Ross.
Yes.
Who at the time worked for Irwin. And he told me the story of how he hated the name Jenga. Couldn't stand it. Didn't want to call it Jenga, but you stuck to your guns. So why?
I mean, I think there was a logic to it. There was also an emotional side to this. I mean, the emotional side was that I just thought it was a really good name. I'd also invested an enormous amount of my time in making that work. And this idea that it didn't mean anything to anybody else was something that I felt was really important. They felt the opposite. They said, "You've got this game that nobody knows. It just looks like a pile of bricks." But I mean, I remember saying at the time, and because I felt it very strongly, I said, if you hang on to that name and it works, then it will forever mean that game. It's not going to mean anything else.
It sounds to me like they really didn't like the name.
Jenga. Jenga. You take a block from the bottom and you put it on top. You take a block from the middle and you put it on top. That's how you build a tower. You just don't stop. You gotta build that tower, putting blocks on top. And it teeters and it tires as you build it all up. It weebles and it wobbles, but you don't give up. You take a block from the bottom and you put it on top. You take a block from the middle and you put it on top. Till someone knocks it over and that's when you stop. But you start all over putting blocks on top. Jenga from Irwin. Great game with a strange name.
I love that. they gave up fighting about the name, but they also did this thing where they branded the blocks, and I thought that was genius. And I think they sold, oh God, I think they took orders for something like 40,000 or something at the time, which was, was sort of mind-blowing.
Jenga was distributed through Canada by Irwin Toys and in the US by a company called Shopper Toys, the company who made Cootie and Ants in the Pants. When Shopper ran into financial difficulty, Milton Bradley ended up licensing the game, and they knew how to sell games. I remember looking at the number of games that Jenga was selling and gobsmacked. As a designer, I remember thinking, okay, it's 54 pieces of wood. What is going on here? And then I actually took the time to play it and just fell in love with the suspense and how it plays. So talk a little bit about the actual play of Jenga and why you think it struck a nerve.
It's something, thinking about that, why Jenga works, is something I've gone back to time and time again. And I don't know that that anybody could come up with just an answer very quickly. I think it's got multiple things going on there, and sometimes they're not quite as obvious as they might appear. I mean, you could say things like, "Oh, it's very simple. It has so few rules. There's no language issues." I mean, of course, all of that feeds into why it's something that goes. It's why it's worked across the world so easily. I did this whole TED talk basically because what I found fascinating about this is this TED talk had this overarching theme to it, which they call simplexity, and the idea of something being complex doesn't mean that it's complicated. It means that it's actually, you talk about something being complex as being something rich and actually quite deep. Maybe Jenga is that. Maybe Jenga is something that you look at that looks simple, but actually results in these very complex things that happen. And I think a very big part of that is that you can't win this game. I mean, you know from the beginning that you're not going to win it. Gravity is going to win. I mean, I don't know whether I'm right in this, but it's something that I hit on this idea that every time you manage to take a block out and put it back on the top, and the thing stands still, you feel more euphoric about that moment than you would do in a comparable game. So it is more complex. It's richer. The experience is richer than it would appear when you think what you've got is just a pile of bricks.
That sound that's Jenga. And it signifies that moment when, okay, I took my turn and it didn't fall.
Yes.
My favorite part of the game is always when, by some miracle, you make your turn and it doesn't fall. And you think, well, I'm out. There's no way it's coming back to me. 6 people have to go. And gosh darn it, all 6 go and it's back. And you didn't even think you could do it, much less 6 more turns.
I can't say that I had thought all that through. I didn't sit and design a game that was going to meet those criteria. I think I would be too much to claim that.
So when I was writing my book and doing my research, I knew I wanted to cover Jenga and found you. And you were sort of people didn't know who you were. Do you remember that phone call?
I remember it. I mean, one of my claims to fame is that I know you for having bought it. I remember it very well because it was. I think I had been so involved in Jenga initially, and then it was sort of. It then became sort of quite. I mean, it became somebody else's baby, if you like, and I wasn't consulted very much. I slightly took control of that narrative. I mean, it was very deliberate because I was coming up against more and more people that were telling me what the origins of Jenga were. Even with people at Hasbro had never heard of me. It wasn't a vanity thing. It was just weird. And then when you approached me and wrote that book and actually, in a sense, convinced me, I was convinced that there was a story behind this game, that maybe the story is worth telling. That combined with my husband saying, you've just got to take control of this narrative. That I wrote a book then, and I wanted it really to be my story. I didn't want to have to massage it. And it was actually translated into Korean and into Japanese since then, and since Shytag, and with sort of Mary Cousins sort of, and you and Peggy Brown and people in actually saying that inventors count. I thought, okay, I'll be more proactive in this, and it's been a very interesting journey doing that.
Leslie Scott's story has come full circle. The game left Africa, went to the United Kingdom, then to America, then to Canada, back to America, and all over the world. As her royalties started to pour in, she wasn't content to have her story end there.
I had a house built in Kenya on a research centre, where the research centre called the house JENGA House because of the game Jenga, because I was involved in getting the house built. And I'm married to a zoologist. He was the one that said to me, what this place needs is a house where more senior scientists could come and live for a year. And we get to stay there when we go, but otherwise it's available for senior scientists. And there have been some really, really interesting people who have stayed there. The fact that you have these sort of people all working together, from across the globe working there it's amazing. It's a research centre called Impala that's in about 50,000. It owns a 50,000 acre conservancy, and there's scientists that go there from mostly from Princeton University, but all sorts of American universities to work there with the scientists, the resident scientists. And they research everything from the water quality to environmental change. If from the outside you're looking at something that looks like it's really out there, sort of in the bush, and but it's so high tech, some of the stuff that they're doing there. So it's very exciting. It's very exciting.
So one of the highlights, or maybe the highlight of your time with Jenga, you wrote to me and said it was building this house.
It was building that. Jenga going from becoming so successful has. I don't even know how to express that. Highlight. It's a huge honor for me to be able to be in that position. The opportunity to have this amount of land and these animals sitting on the equator. It's amazing. Sorry, I've taken you completely off guard.
No, well, as if giving joy to millions, if not maybe a billion people with your game, you have the legacy of also having built that house and the research there. That's just wonderful.
Yeah, it's that that makes me very happy. It's used a lot when people are talking about the fragility of the ecosystem, and the World Wildlife Fund used it in an advert where what happens if you remove something that doesn't make the tower fall down immediately. I mean, the whole ecosystem doesn't collapse immediately, but you have no idea further on down whether that has been a key animal or plant to that particular ecosystem. And I think that I love that idea.
And just this month, it was announced that Jenga is a 2020 inductee into the National Toy Hall of Fame. Jenga joins just 73 other legendary toys in the hall, enshrined at the Strong National Museum of Play in Rochester, New York. All this makes Jenga one block party that's hard to resist, even if gravity always wins. A huge thank you to Leslie Scott. As always, please consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel, and hitting that notification bell so you never miss the fun. What classic toy would you like me to cover next? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, seize the play.